Okay, so we're going to start section 13.2, and we're going to solve trig functions and talk about angles of rotations. There's a lot of vocab in this this section here that is actually very, maybe not necessarily knowing the vocabulary word, even though those are going to be in the questions, but the concepts are extremely important. They're the fundamentals of trig. And going forward in your next classes, when you see trig in those classes, it's important to understand what coterminal and reference angles are and how to find them quickly. And it's just one of those basic skills like being able to add and subtract and multiply and divide. So when it comes to trig, it's one of those basic fundamental skills that you need to be able to do. It's not necessarily difficult, it's just, it's new to you. So that being said, the biggest things that we're going to talk about here is coterminal, and reference angles. And then once we get comfortable with that, we're going to talk about, an angle and standard position and drawing a triangle and using SOHCAHTOA. So let's move on. So here is the vocab that you need to be comfortable with. All the questions are going to be using these words, so you need to understand what these words mean. And I'm going to go through each one of these with a diagram. And so if you come up on a quiz or a test, obviously if you have a question, I'll help you out with its homework. But if you got a quiz question, you don't know what initial side means, that tells me you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So make sure you understand what these words are. Okay? So angle of rotation, initial side, terminal side, standard position, reference angle, and what is coterminal. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a coordinate grid. Okay, and so XY coordinate plane, and let's do it in black here. I'm going to shrink this a little bit so I can get a little bit of a bigger graph. Okay, so we got our image here, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this little guy right here, and that is the beginning of my angle. Okay, and then let's go like so. Let's do this. Okay, so here is my angle of rotation. Okay, does that make sense? Right, I'm rotating my angle. Now, I always rotate from my initial side. So this guy right here is my initial side. Okay? Sorry for the penmanship here. And the terminal side, terminal meaning ending, right? So this guy right here is my terminal side. And I'll just put T side. Okay? So that's where it stops. This is a graph that's in standard position. Okay? So standard position is this whole thing. Okay? So this whole thing is standard position. So the idea is the initial side is always the positive x-axis. I'm saying positive x-axis because the angle starts, this ray is going to start on the positive part of the x-axis. Okay? So the terminal side, right, it ends anywhere. It could end anywhere in this coordinate plane, but just as long as I'm rotating. And I could technically rotate counterclockwise or clockwise. It doesn't matter. So we'll put up a couple different pictures here. So if I wanted to rotate counterclockwise, it technically would be the same angle. I would just rotate that direction. Okay? And so let's say this angle measurement is 150 degrees. Well, that means this one would be negative 210 degrees. Okay? And so notice when I add them together, the absolute values, I would get 360 degrees. Okay, so when we rotate counterclockwise, we'll talk about that more, but when I rotate counterclockwise, I am going to be a negative, when I rotate clockwise, this way, I'm going to be a negative angle. When I rotate counterclockwise, I'm going to be a positive angle. The quadrants are labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so I want to technically rotate in numerical order, right? So that's the positive direction, right? So that means I would rotate from 1 to 2 to 3 and to 4. So that's considered a positive rotation. Whereas, so that's counterclockwise. So clockwise would be a negative rotation. Get to the same spot. The negative is just telling us direction. Okay? So we've talked about the angle of rotation. We've talked about the initial side, the terminal side, and the standard position. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this graph up. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about reference angle and coterminal. Okay? Okay, so we got an angle here in standard position. So I have my initial side, my terminal side or terminal ray. Here's my angle of rotation. I'm in standard position. The vertex is at the origin. My angle is a positive 140 degrees because I'm rotating counterclockwise. So now, first thing I'm going to talk about is a coterminal angle. So a coterminal angle is an angle that has the same terminal side. So this has got the same terminal side. Okay, so this is an angle that's coterminal. And I'm going to find it by subtracting 360 from 140, and I'm going to get negative 220 degrees. Okay, so now I'm actually going to graph another coterminal angle. It's a circle, right? Or they're angle rotations. So I can go around as many times as I want, right? So here we go. I went around once. That's 360 degrees. I'm going to change the thickness of the pen so you guys can see it a little bit more. I run around twice. That's getting really messy. And I went around until I hit it. So I ran around twice, and then I stopped at that same spot. So that means if I go around a circle twice, that's 360 degrees, then another 360 degrees, and then I went the extra 140. So notice what I'm doing here. I'm adding 360 every time. Okay? So if I'm dealing with angles, so in order to find a coterminal angle, I can add or subtract 360 from my given angle. Okay? And that is how we can find coterminal angles. You just add or subtract 360, boom, you got a terminal angle. Okay? So last but not least, we're going to talk about reference angles, and I'll just do this right here. Actually, I'm going to do a separate video on reference angles because this one's getting too long. That's how we find coterminals. The very next video will be reference angles. Talk about how to find those guys.